I revisit Grant Bresett as he explains that Christians need to start with the resurrection to prove their faith. I'd settle for them just starting with objective evidence. Is there any hope? Signs point to no. I know I've looked at Grant Bresett before, and I wasn't impressed. But this time, I see what he has to say about the resurrection, and find out that he has nothing to say. Nothing substantive, at least. He only pretends that it happened, then he assumes that he's right, and because he's right, the rest of Christianity becomes worthwhile. Sorry, that's not how this works. So I guess we have to see what kind of theistic emotional silliness Grant gives up to as we start with the resurrection.
Hey, this is Grant Bresett talking about Christian apologetics, defending the Christian faith. If you are going to defend the Christian faith, I recommend that you start with the resurrection.
Yes, let's start somewhere completely indefensible that has no evidence of any kind to support it. Sure, let's start there.
The gospel is the good news that Jesus died on the cross for humanity's sins so that we can be reunited.
The Gospels are claims. They are not proof. They are stories. They are not evidence. And that's something that I never get about the religious, although I can certainly understand their reasoning. The idea that they claim to have evidence, which they can't present, or when they do present it, it's completely unconvincing to anyone who doesn't already believe it, and they're impressed with that. Yeah, they shouldn't be.
It's based on two things: the fall of man. Number one, there's a problem, and I don't have a problem believing that because I watch the evening news online or on TV. There's a problem with people. No matter how advanced we get technologically or medically, there is a moral corruption aspect, especially as we saw in the shooting that just took place in Las Vegas at the Mandalay Bay.
Now, you're welcome to think that there's a moral problem, but really, there's just a problem with your expectations of mankind. We're just animals after all. You might not like that fact, but it's a fact nonetheless. And people are not going to be what you want them to be. That's why we have laws and rules and punishments for breaking those rules and laws. You have to come to grips with the reality that is, rather than desperately wish for a reality that you want, but you don't have.
The good news is God came in the form of a man as Jesus to die in our place so that we can be in perfect relationship with him in heaven.
Well, that's the claim anyhow. Now how about you prove any of that? And we know you can't, because he has no answers and he has no evidence. He just wishes that the stories told in an ancient book of mythology were true, and since he only cares about his feelings and not the facts, he declares without evidence that it's all real so he can get a warm emotional fuzzy. These people are immature children.
That is the basics. So my recommendation is to start with the gospel. The ground zero of Christianity is the resurrection.
Then it's time to pack it in and join reality because, according to the objectively verifiable evidence that we have, or at least should have if any of this was true, there's no reason whatsoever to take your silly story seriously.
So the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 14 and 19 says that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, our faith is in vain, preaching is completely useless. And I agree. The Grant Bresett translation is, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then sleep in on Sunday, go have some pancakes and syrup, because this is as good as it gets.
And take it from me, sleeping in on Sunday is fantastic. I would never go back to dragging myself out of bed so I can sit with a bunch of old fogies listening to an irrational lunatic whining at all of us from the pulpit. Life is so much better when you give up your crazy blind faith and join reality.
Every other subject is an expansion outward. So everything is based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The existence of God, Jesus' claim to be God. I think he proved being God by resurrection, by living a sinless, a perfect life.
But you can't prove any of that. It's like saying that Harry Potter proved that he was the chosen one by being the boy that lived. Sure, that's a claim. You have a book that makes that claim, but you've entirely missed that inconvenient little problem of proving that the claim is true before you leap into believing it blindly. You need to back up and take care of that proving bit.
So every other issue that we study and that we talk about outside the resurrection is in one sense secondary.
And in every sense irrelevant, because you can't do more than talk about it. You can't show that any of it happened, that your imaginary friend is real, that Jesus ever existed, etc. There has to come a time when you do more than just talk about it. You have to prove that any of it actually happened. I think you need to get to that point sooner rather than later.
Now, in another video, I'm going to talk about essential versus non-essential doctrine, and I'll explain that in the next video. But for now, what I'd like to recommend is that if you are going to witness Christ, if you're going to talk about the gospel, or even if you're not listening to me and you're not a Christian, the first point is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Everything's based on the resurrection.
And you still have no proof that it happened. Now we shouldn't be surprised that he's preaching to the choir, a choir that doesn't ask any questions and doesn't have any standards of proof that need to be met. Sure, he mentions people who don't believe in Christianity, but he offers no reason whatsoever that any of them should. He just repeats over and over that this thing happened, but he doesn't give any clue how he knows that or how he tested the claim to see if it's true.
If the resurrection did not happen, then who cares whether God was justified in ordering the death of the Canaanites? None of that matters.
But you're still assuming that God exists in the first place. So to stick with my standard Harry Potter analogy, if Harry Potter didn't survive Voldemort's attack on him as an infant, then nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if Dumbledore ever came to teach at Hogwarts. It doesn't matter if Voldemort splintered his soul into Horcruxes. The fact that it's all fantasy doesn't seem to mean anything to the true believer, and that's a problem.
But once we understand that Jesus rose from the dead, now things get kind of interesting, and now the adventure really starts.
Once you prove that Jesus rose from the dead, not understand, prove. Because without that proof, you're just spouting a load of religious gibberish. You can't understand anything that isn't demonstrably real. Get to work.
Why do I believe the Bible's the Word of God? Why do I believe in the existence of God? Why do I believe the Bible is accurately transmitted to us over the last 2,000 years? There's good, solid evidence.
And where would that evidence be? Because I'm asking why you would believe any of that without having objectively verifiable evidence to support it. And whether you want to believe that such evidence exists or not, the fact remains that you don't have it, you can't present it, and there's no reason whatsoever to think that anyone has ever seen such evidence. It's wishes and dreams and emotional comfort, nothing more.
But everything else is secondary to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And again, in another video, I'm going to talk about the difference between essential doctrine and non-essential. And I'm also going to explain what other issues you can talk about that really don't have as much of an impact.
Meaning, you're just going to go on making more and more unsupportable, irrational claims because the whole idea of magical men in the sky appeals to you on an emotional level, and you really couldn't care less if any of it is so. Come on, Grant. We can all see straight through you.
I want to know about the ages of Adam. I think there's good answers and good ideas about that, but those are secondary issues.
They're non-existent issues until you can prove Adam was real. You have every bit of your work ahead of you. Maybe you ought to focus on that rather than pretending that you know anything at all.
If Jesus rose from the dead, he probably is who he said he is, which is God in human form.
If. You're hardly the first apologist who used that word. Well, I don't care about if, I care about proof. I care about evidence. I care if that claim can be objectively defended and supported. And unfortunately for you, it can't be.
Well, this has been Grant Bresett talking about defending the Christian faith. Thanks.
Yet you've done nothing of the sort, because if you want to defend it, you have to do more than just talk about it. You have to actually show that the claims made in the Bible are true and that the things that you want to believe actually happened. And to that, you've done absolutely nothing, nor have any of your religious brethren, because what you wish was true isn't enough. It's what you can prove is true that matters. When do you think you're going to be getting around to producing objectively verifiable evidence that the claims in the Bible actually happened? Never? That's what I thought. And that's why I don't take a thing coming out of your religious mouth seriously. And neither should anyone else.